That night, the rain came down like the sky itself had opened. I stood on the porch of a rented cottage no bigger than a double garage, holding my little girl against my chest as if I could shield her from every storm in the world. She was asleep, her small breath warm against my neck, but my hands trembled. The truth was too heavy to ignore. We were alone. Utterly alone. My name is Lily Thompson, and this is how I almost lost everything before I even had a chance to build a life worth living. I grew up thinking family meant safety, but I learned too early that not every roof with people inside could be called home. After my parents died in a car accident when I was 6, I was placed in foster care. Eventually, a couple named Brenda and Earl King took me in. On the surface, they looked like decent people, but inside those walls, kindness was a performance for social workers and neighbors. Behind closed doors, I was cheap labor with a bed in a dusty storage room. Every plate I scrubbed, every weed I pulled from their garden, was met not with thanks, but with reminders that I should be grateful I wasn't back at the group home. Still, I told myself it was temporary. One day, I would be old enough to leave, to earn my own living and make my own family. That thought kept me breathing, even when Brenda's voice cut sharp as a knife through the kitchen or when Earl slammed doors for no reason other than to remind me I was small and powerless. But the worst of it came the night her younger brother Roy showed up. He had just been released from prison and already had whiskey on his breath. I was 16, tall but still fragile, and I knew trouble when I saw it in someone's eyes. Roy looked at me like I was something he could take. That night, I learned what real fear feels like, not the kind you get watching a scary movie, but the kind that burns into your chest because you know no one is coming to save you. I ran, out the back door, across the yard, barefoot on gravel, rain soaking my clothes and blurring my vision. I don't remember deciding to run. I just knew I had to get away. I slipped near the fence and skinned my knee, but I didn't stop. And then, out of nowhere, a voice called, "Hey, leave her alone." I spun around and saw a young man stepping out from under a tree, holding what looked like a BB gun. Roy cursed, spat into the mud, and turned back toward the house, muttering something I couldn't hear. The stranger walked toward me, rain dripping off the brim of his cap. "You okay?" he asked. I wanted to say yes, but my teeth chattered too hard to form words. He crouched, saw my bleeding knee, and said softly, "Let's get you somewhere warm. My grandmother lives just down the road. She'll know what to do." That's how I met Jason Harris, the man who, though I didn't know it then, would one day save both me and my little girl in ways I couldn't imagine. That night, I followed him through the rain, too exhausted to argue, too scared to go back, and too desperate to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone finally cared. Jason's grandmother lived in a small white house with green shutters and a porch swing that creaked softly in the wind. When we stepped inside, the smell of chamomile and fresh-baked bread wrapped around me like a blanket. For a moment, it felt like stepping into another world, a world where no one yelled or slammed doors just to remind you how little you mattered. "Jason? Who's this?" A warm voice called from the kitchen. An older woman appeared, wiping her hands on a floral apron. Her hair was silver, but her eyes were bright, kind, and full of questions. "This is Lily," Jason said gently. "She's hurt. Can we use the first aid kit?" The woman, Grandma Ruth, nodded and without hesitation guided me to the kitchen table. Her hands were soft, her voice steady as she examined my knee. "It's not too deep," she said, dabbing at the blood. "Just a scrape, but we'll clean it up. Sit still, sweetheart." Sweetheart, that word nearly undid me. It had been years since anyone called me something like that. Jason crouched beside me, holding the antiseptic wipes, his expression focused but tender. "Sorry about my uncle's gun scaring you," he said. "It's just a pellet gun. I figured the sight of it would make him back off." I shook my head. "You didn't scare me." "He did." My voice cracked, and I hated that it did. Jason didn't push. He simply nodded, like he understood more than I was saying. Grandma Ruth poured hot tea, and slid it across the table. "Drink this. You're trembling." I wrapped my hands around the mug and stared down at it, afraid to look up, afraid I'd start crying and wouldn't be able to stop. Jason sat across from me. "You don't have to go back there tonight, he said softly. "If you don't feel safe." Safe. The word felt foreign on my tongue, like something people in movies talked about, not girls like me. "I don't have anywhere else," I whispered. Grandma Ruth leaned forward, her gaze kind but firm. "Honey, you're not sleeping in that house tonight. You can stay here. We've got a spare room. Jason will drive you to the social services office in the morning if you want. They need to know what's happening." The thought of going back to the King's house made my stomach turn. I saw Roy's eyes in my mind, wild, mean, and full of something I didn't want to name. "Okay," I said, barely audible. Jason smiled slightly, a warmth in his eyes that caught me off guard. "You made the right choice." I stayed that night in a small guest room that smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. Grandma Ruth brought me an extra quilt and fussed over my pillow until it was just right. I lay there in the dark, listening to the rain on the roof, and for the first time in years, I didn't fall asleep afraid. I fell asleep hopeful. What I didn't know then was that this night would be a turning point, that meeting Jason and Grandma Ruth would plant a seed of change in me. It wouldn't bloom overnight, but it was the start of something I had never experienced before. The start of believing life could be different. The morning light in Grandma Ruth's house felt different, softer, warmer, as if it carried a promise I hadn't felt in years. I woke up to the smell of biscuits, baking, and coffee brewing, and for a moment, I forgot where I was. Then it came back, the running, the rain, Roy's eyes, Jason's voice telling me I'd be safe. When I stepped into the kitchen, Grandma Ruth was already setting the table. "Morning, sweetheart," she said with the kind of cheer that sounded genuine, not forced. "Sit, eat. You look like you haven't had a good breakfast in a while." She wasn't wrong. I hadn't had a breakfast that wasn't cold cereal or day-old bread in. I couldn't remember how long. I sat quietly while she handed me scrambled eggs, bacon, and a biscuit still warm enough to melt butter on contact. Jason came in moments later, fresh from the morning air, his hair damp from a quick shower. "You sleep okay?" he asked, glancing at me. I nodded, though my throat tightened. Better than I had in years. After breakfast, Jason drove me to the social services office, the one place I had avoided since leaving the group home. My hands shook in my lap as we pulled into the parking lot. "You don't have to go through with this if you're not ready," he said, his voice low, careful. "No, I'm ready," I whispered. "I can't keep living like that." Inside, a caseworker named Ms. Barnes listened while I explained everything. The chores, the yelling, the threats to send me back, and finally, Roy's attempt to corner me in my room. My voice trembled, but I forced myself to keep speaking. Jason sat beside me the whole time, silent but steady, like an anchor in a storm. When I finished, Ms. Barnes sighed and leaned back in her chair. "Lily, you don't have to go back there. We can move you into a group home until we find another placement. You did the right thing by coming here." Relief hit me so hard, I almost cried again. I had dreaded being sent back to that dark little room. Dreaded seeing Roy's smirk and Brenda's cold eyes. Now I wouldn't have to. Outside, Jason walked me to the car. "You okay?" he asked. "I think so," I said, staring at the pavement. "I don't know what's going to happen next, but it's better than what I had." He smiled and handed me a folded piece of paper. "My number. If you need anything or just want to talk, call me, okay? I mean it." That day, I returned to the group home, not as a scared little girl begging to be accepted, but as someone making her own choice. My room was small, shared with 2 other girls, but it was mine and no one yelled at me for existing. That night, lying in my new bed, I thought about Jason and his grandmother, about the way kindness could feel so unfamiliar and yet so natural once you let it in. For the first time in years, I didn't cry myself to sleep. I closed my eyes and let a thought take root in me. Maybe life didn't have to stay this way forever. Maybe there was still something worth hoping for. Life at the group home was nothing like the King household. It wasn't perfect, rules were strict, curfews tight, and privacy rare, but it was fair. For the first time in years, I didn't have to earn my place by doing endless chores or fearing someone's temper. I had a bed, meals 3 times a day, and people who were there for the same reason as me, to survive and find something better. My roommates were Jenna and Chloe. Jenna was my age, with sharp wit and an energy that filled every room. Chloe was younger, shy and quiet, always reading in the corner. Jenna quickly decided we were going to be friends whether I liked it or not, and honestly, I didn't mind. It felt good to have someone who didn't look at me like a burden. Still, I kept my guard up at first. Years of being told I was lucky to even have a roof over my head had carved deep habits into me. I flinched at raised voices, even when they weren't angry. I said sorry far too often, but bit by bit, the group home softened those edges. I joined sewing classes in the evenings, partly because it gave me something to do, partly because I loved the rhythm of a needle and thread. Creating something new out of scraps felt symbolic, like maybe I could stitch together the pieces of myself too. Jason kept his promise. He came by every week, sometimes with cookies from Grandma Ruth, sometimes just to say hi. He'd sit with me on the front steps, talking about his pre-med studies and how he wanted to help people one day, to fix what's broken inside and out. His eyes lit up when he talked about it, and I found myself smiling in ways I hadn't in years. Grandma Ruth even visited once, hugging me like she'd known me forever. "Your family now, honey," she said, and I believed her. For someone who had spent so many years feeling unwanted, those words sank deep. Of course, not everything was perfect. Jenna had her own baggage, and sometimes her jokes about rich boys stung more than I let on. But I liked her. We stayed up late whispering about what we wanted from life. She dreamed of traveling the world. I dreamed of something simpler, a little home of my own, and a reason to never look back. For the first time, I started thinking about a future. I wanted to graduate, to find a trade, something solid that would keep me from ever needing people like Brenda and Earl again. Sewing was becoming more than a hobby, it was a plan. I wanted to be independent, to build something from my own hands. And slowly, I let myself imagine what it might be like to have someone like Jason in my life, not just as a friend, but as something more. I kept those thoughts private, though, because the idea of someone actually loving me felt too fragile to speak out loud. But deep down, something had changed. I wasn't that terrified girl running barefoot in the rain anymore. I was someone with a bed, with friends, with a dream. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on my own feet and maybe, just maybe, moving towards something good. It's strange how the smallest moments can change everything. For me, it was the way Jason smiled when he saw me waiting on the steps of the group home one chilly afternoon. He had a paper bag in his hand, and I could smell fresh cinnamon rolls even before he reached me. "Thought you could use something sweet," he said, handing me the bag. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt like no one had ever thought of me like that. Not because they wanted something in return. That moment, something stirred deep inside me, something I had spent years burying. Jason and I started spending more time together. He'd tell me about college, about anatomy labs and late-night study sessions, about his dream of becoming a cardiologist. "Fixing hearts," he said one evening, sitting on the porch swing. "I guess I've always wanted to help people feel whole again." I wanted to tell him he'd already done that for me, that every small act of kindness was stitching my own broken heart back together. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just smiled, holding on to the moment. Jenna noticed. She was quick to pick up on any shift in energy. One night, as we lay in our bunks, she whispered, "You like him, don't you?" Heat rushed to my face. "He's just kind," I muttered. Jenna laughed softly. "Kind and cute. You think I don't see it." Her tone was teasing, but something in her eyes lingered longer than it should have. I ignored it, telling myself I was imagining things. A week later, Jason came by unexpectedly, leaving an envelope at the front desk because I wasn't there. Jenna was. When I returned, she acted like nothing happened. For days, I waited for Jason to mention it, but he didn't. Curiosity finally got the best of me, and I asked, "Did you leave something for me?" He frowned. "Yeah, note. You didn't get it." I shook my head and my stomach sank. That night, while Jenna was in the shower, I checked her side of the dresser. The envelope was there, ripped open. The note inside was simple, sweet. Had to leave for an internship abroad. "I'll miss you. Call me when you can." My hands trembled as I put it back. Jenna had read it, hidden it, and said nothing. She came in moments later, towel around her shoulders, and froze when she saw my face. "You went through my stuff," she snapped. "You stole my letter," I whispered. Her jaw tightened. "I was just looking out for you. Guys like him, Lily? They leave. They don't stick around for girls like us." The words cut deep. I wanted to scream, to demand why she thought she had the right to make that choice for me. Instead, I walked out, tears stinging my eyes. Jason left for that internship, and I didn't hear from him again for almost a year. Maybe Jenna was right. Maybe I wasn't the kind of girl someone stayed for. So I threw myself into sewing, into planning a future that didn't rely on anyone but me. But late at night, when the lights were out and the house was quiet, I couldn't stop wondering if Jason had really forgotten me, or if life was simply teaching me one more cruel lesson about trust. A year passed, and life moved on whether I wanted it to or not. I finished my sewing program, got a part-time job at a small alterations shop downtown, and focused on building something stable for myself. The group home started to feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a stepping stone toward the life I wanted. Still, there were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had happened to Jason. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, I was walking through Forsyth Park, enjoying the smell of roasted peanuts from a nearby vendor, when I heard someone call, "Lily." I turned, and there he was, Jason, older somehow, more sure of himself, but still with that same warm smile. I froze for a second, stunned. Then, before I could think, I ran to him and threw my arms around his neck. "Whoa," he laughed, hugging me back tightly. "Guess you missed me?" "You disappeared," I said, pulling back to look at him. "You didn't write, you didn't call." Jason frowned. "I left a letter before I flew out. You didn't get it." My chest tightened. "Jenna!" I whispered, suddenly understanding. He shook his head, an incredulous smile forming. "I should have known something was off. I kept waiting for you to call, but I figured maybe you didn't want to talk." We stood there in silence for a moment, and then he took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Lily. I should have done more to make sure you knew how much you mean to me." I swallowed hard. "You mean?" Jason smiled, that easy, genuine smile I remembered. "I mean, I thought about you every single day while I was gone. And now that I'm back, I don't plan on disappearing again." We spent the whole afternoon walking and talking, catching up on everything we'd missed. Jason told me about his internship in New York, about working alongside top surgeons and how it solidified his dream of becoming a cardiologist. "I want to fix hearts, Lily. Literally. But also, in other ways." His eyes lingered on me when he said that, and something in my chest fluttered. That evening, he drove me back to the group home. When he stopped the car, I hesitated, hand on the door handle. "Jason, why me?" He looked at me like it was the easiest question in the world. "Because you're you. Strong, kind, beautiful. You've been through hell and still managed to care about people. How could I not fall for that?" The words hit me so hard I could barely breathe. For so long, I had convinced myself no one could ever see me as worthy, as someone to love. And yet here he was, saying it like it was obvious. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't need to. The way he touched my hand before I stepped out of the car was enough. It felt like the beginning of something real, something that could last, if I was brave enough to let it. That night, lying in bed, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't dreaming about someday. I was living it right now. When Jason told me he wanted me to meet his parents, I hesitated. "Are you sure?" I asked, twisting my hands together. "They don't even know me." "They will," he said, smiling like it was the easiest thing in the world. "And they'll love you, just like I do." The words "just like I do" hung in the air, warm and terrifying at the same time. No one had ever said that to me before. I nodded, hoping he was right, but a pit formed in my stomach anyway. A week later, we drove to his parents' estate, just outside Savannah. The Harris home was breathtaking. White columns, manicured gardens, and a porch big enough to host a wedding. For a moment, I stood frozen, clutching my simple purse, suddenly aware of my thrift store dress and scuffed shoes. Jason squeezed my hand. "You look perfect," he whispered, then led me inside. His mother, Eleanor, was the first to greet us. She was tall, elegant, and carried herself like someone who'd never been told no in her life. She looked me up and down, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This is Lily?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I said softly, trying to smile. "MMM," she murmured, then turned to Jason. "Dinner's ready." We sat at a long table that could have seated 20. His father, a serious man named Richard, asked polite but pointed questions. Where I lived, what I did for work, where I came from. I answered as best I could, my voice steady even as my chest tightened. When I mentioned sewing and alterations, Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "So, not a college girl then?" "No, ma'am," I said quietly. "I went to a vocational program." "I see." She set down her wine glass. "Jason, may I speak to you in private?" Jason shook his head. "Whatever you want to say, you can say it here." Her eyes flicked to me, cold and sharp. "Jason, you're on your way to becoming a doctor. You have opportunities most people can only dream of, and you bring home." She gestured at me like I wasn't even in the room. "This? A girl from a group home? Do you even know who her family is?" Blood rushed to my face, and I struggled to breathe. "Mrs. Harris," I said quietly. "I know I'm not," but Jason cut me off. "Enough, Mom. Lily's my choice, and I love her." The words should have made me happy, but all I felt was small and exposed. Eleanor's expression softened for a moment. Pity, not kindness, then hardened again. "Love doesn't pay bills, Jason. One day, you'll thank me for saving you from a mistake." I couldn't take it. I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. "Thank you for dinner," I said, my voice trembling. "I should go." Jason reached for my hand. "Lily," but I pulled away, blinking back tears as I walked out of that pristine house. The cool night air hit my face, and I realized my chest hurt, not because of Eleanor's words, but because some part of me had believed them. Jason found me outside by the car. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, wrapping his arms around me. "They were wrong. You hear me? Wrong." I wanted to believe him, but a voice in the back of my mind whispered, "People like you don't belong in houses like that." After that dinner, things between Jason and me grew complicated. He did everything he could to reassure me. Calls late at night, surprise visits with takeout when I was too tired to cook. Even flowers left at the group home's front desk. But no matter how kind he was, I couldn't shake the image of his mother's face, the way she looked at me as though I were some charity case he'd picked up on the street. A month later, I found out I was pregnant. I stared at the little blue plus sign on the test, sitting on the bathroom floor of my small apartment, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. I should have been happy. This was our child, the result of a love I never thought I'd find. But instead, fear settled over me like a heavy quilt I couldn't push off. Would Jason still want me when he knew? Would his family use this as proof that I was trapping him? I waited 2 days before finally calling him. "Can you come over?" I asked, my voice shaky. He came immediately, smiling like he always did when he saw me. "What's wrong?" Are you okay? I handed him the test, unable to speak. His eyes widened, and for a second, I couldn't read his expression. Then he smiled and pulled me into a hug. We're having a baby. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Lily, this is amazing, he said. We'll figure it out, okay? I'm with you. Always. For a little while, I believed him. We talked about moving into a bigger place, about him picking up more shifts, about building a family together. I dared to let myself dream again until the day I saw him with her. It was raining, and I had taken an earlier bus home. As I stepped off near a coffee shop, I saw Jason inside, sitting across from Madison Clark, a polished blonde whose family owned half the real estate in Savannah. She was the girl his mother had once mentioned at dinner, the perfect match for him. They were laughing, leaning close, his hand resting near hers on the table. My stomach twisted. I froze there, watching through the glass like I was looking at someone else's life fall apart. When Jason spotted me, his face changed, surprise, guilt, something I couldn't name, and I ran before he could reach me. That night, his mother called me. I don't know how she got my number, but her voice was calm, almost sweet. Jason's a good man, she said, and he's going to do the right thing for his future. Madison is part of that future, dear. I thought you should know before you get hurt worse than you already are. Her words sliced through me. I didn't even argue. I just packed a bag and left. I didn't tell Jason where I was going. I didn't leave a note. I boarded the first bus out of Savannah and never looked back. I ended up in a small town 2 hours away, renting a single room above a sewing shop. When my daughter, Emma, was born, I held her tiny body against my chest and whispered, "It's just us now, baby girl. Just us." And I swore no one would ever hurt us again. Life as a single mother was nothing like I imagined. People romanticize it in movies. Those montages of a mom holding her baby while sunlight streams through the window, smiling like she's never been happier. In reality, it was exhausting, lonely, and terrifying. Emma was everything to me. From the moment I held her in my arms, I knew I would walk through fire for her. She had Jason's eyes, those warm hazel eyes that made my chest ache every time she looked at me. I didn't regret leaving. I told myself every night that walking away was the right choice. But deep down, there were nights I cried quietly after Emma finally drifted off, wondering if I had stolen something from her, a father who might have loved her. I worked at a small sewing shop, taking in alterations and mending clothes for people who didn't even know my name. The hours were long, the pay was low, but it was honest work, and it allowed me to rent a tiny studio apartment. The place was barely big enough for a crib and a mattress, but it was ours. As Emma grew, I started noticing little things. How she tired quickly after running, how her lips sometimes looked a little too pale. At first, I chalked it up to her being small for her age. But then came the day at the park when she collapsed on the grass after climbing the slide, clutching her chest. Panic took over. I scooped her up and rushed to the nearest urgent care. The doctor's face was grave as he listened to her heart. "She has a congenital heart defect," he said quietly, handing me a pamphlet with diagrams I couldn't bring myself to look at. "She's going to need surgery, soon." Surgery. The word echoed in my ears long after we left. How was I supposed to pay for surgery when I could barely cover rent and groceries? I tried not to let Emma see me cry, but some nights she'd toddle over, pat my cheek, and whisper, "It's okay, Mama." She was 4 years old and already comforting me. The community in that little town stepped up in small ways. Mrs. Porter, who owned the shop below my apartment, watched Emma for free when I worked late. The man at the corner store started slipping extra fruit into my grocery bag. Even so, no one could give me what I really needed. Enough money to save my little girl's life. I started taking extra sewing work, staying up past midnight to finish orders. My fingers bled from pinpricks, but I didn't care. I kept telling myself if I just pushed harder, worked longer, I could make it happen. But as Emma's condition worsened, the hope I clung to started slipping through my fingers like sand. One evening, after Emma had another fainting spell, I sat on the kitchen floor, holding her tiny body in my lap while she slept and whispered to the dark, "I can't lose her. I can't." That night, I prayed for the first time in years. I didn't pray for money or even for strength. I prayed for a miracle, something, anything to keep my daughter alive. The miracle I prayed for came on a day that began like any other until it didn't. Emma and I were at the park, one of her favorite places, even though she tired quickly. She was on the swings laughing, her little hands gripping the chains as I gently pushed her. "Higher, Mama," she giggled. But moments later, her laughter cut off. She clutched her chest, gasping for air, and then collapsed. My heart stopped. "Emma." I scooped her into my arms, panic blinding me. "Somebody help." I screamed. A man sprinted from across the park, medical bags slung over his shoulder. He knelt beside me, already pulling out equipment. "I'm a doctor," he said quickly. "Set her down now." I laid Emma on the grass, shaking. The man checked her pulse, then opened her airway. "She's going into arrhythmia," he muttered, working fast, attaching pads from a portable monitor to her chest. His movements were swift, precise, someone who knew exactly what to do. And then, as he looked up to reassure me, I froze. Those eyes hazel, warm, achingly familiar. "Jason," I whispered, stunned. He paused, recognition flashing across his face. "Lily?" But there was no time to process. He focused back on Emma, stabilizing her until her breathing steadied and her tiny chest rose and fell in rhythm again. When she finally opened her eyes, weak but conscious, I almost collapsed with relief. Jason carried her to his car. "My clinic's 5 minutes away. We'll take her there now." I climbed into the back seat, clutching Emma, still too shocked to speak. The clinic was new and bright, clearly successful. Jason owned it. I could see his name on the wall. Dr. Jason Harris, cardiology specialist. He examined Emma thoroughly, reviewing her hospital records I had brought along. His face grew tight. "She needs surgery soon. Without it, Lily, it's serious." "I know," I said, my voice breaking. "But I can't afford—" "You don't have to," he interrupted. "I'll cover everything. She's my patient now." I stared at him. "Jason, why?" After all this time, he met my eyes, pain flickering in his expression. "Because she's my daughter, isn't she?" The words punched the air from my lungs. I couldn't answer, just nodded through tears. He sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I looked for you, Lily. For years. I thought you didn't want me, didn't want us." "My mother!" "She told me you were with Madison." I whispered. His jaw tightened. "Madison?" "That was a business lunch, nothing more." "My mother. She wanted me with someone suitable." "I had no idea she reached out to you." Silence stretched between us, filled with all the years we had lost. Jason finally reached across the table, taking my trembling hand in his. "We can't change what happened, but we can fix this together." He looked at Emma, who was resting quietly now, her tiny fingers curled into my shirt. "She's ours, Lily, and I'm not letting either of you go again." For the first time in years, I believed him. And for the first time in months, I let myself hope, not just for Emma's health, but for something I thought I'd lost forever. A family. Emma's surgery was scheduled within the week. Jason insisted on overseeing every detail himself, staying by her side before and after the procedure. Watching him work, calm and focused, I saw not just the man I once loved, but the doctor he had become. The one who fixed hearts for a living, including mine. The morning of the surgery, I sat in the waiting room, clutching a cup of coffee I didn't drink, my fingers trembling. Jason came over, still in scrubs, and crouched beside me. "She's going to be okay, Lily. I promise." I nodded, unable to speak. For hours, I sat there replaying every moment of Emma's life. The first time she smiled, her soft giggles, the way she held my face when she was tired. Losing her was unthinkable. When Jason finally emerged, pulling off his cap, his eyes were wet. "She's fine. The surgery was a success." Relief hit me so hard I covered my face and sobbed. Jason pulled me into his arms, holding me until the trembling stopped. "You don't have to do this alone anymore," he whispered. The days that followed felt like stepping into sunlight after years of gray. Jason moved us into his home, temporarily while Emma recovered. At first, it felt strange. His world was polished, stable, so different from my tiny apartment above the sewing shop. But Jason didn't treat me like a guest. He treated me like family. Grandma Ruth visited with soup and flowers, hugging Emma like she was her own great-grandchild. One afternoon, while Emma napped, Jason and I sat on the porch swing where everything had once started. "Lily," he said softly, "I know we've lost a lot of time, and I know I can't erase what happened. But I love you. I always have. Will you give me another chance?" The answer came without hesitation. "Yes, Jason. I want that too." We married 6 months later in a small ceremony by the Savannah River. It wasn't grand, but it was perfect. Emma scattering flower petals with a huge grin, Grandma Ruth crying happy tears, and even Jason's father showing up, looking quietly proud. His mother chose not to attend, and for the first time, it didn't matter. Our new home wasn't a mansion like his parents' estate, but it was ours, a warm, light-filled house with a garden big enough for Emma to run through barefoot. I planted roses along the fence, their scent filling the air every morning. Jason built Emma a swing set, and every evening, he taught her how to pump her legs higher, laughing alongside her. Sometimes, I'd sit on the porch and watch them, my heart so full it almost hurt. I thought back to that scared girl running barefoot in the rain, believing no one in the world cared if she disappeared. She was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, someone who had built a life full of love and belonging. We still faced challenges. Life doesn't magically become perfect, but now we faced them together. I had a husband who adored me, a daughter who was healthy and full of joy, and a home that finally felt like home. Looking out at the roses blooming under the Georgia sun, I whispered to myself, "This is what healing looks like." And for the first time in years, I believed it with all my heart.